October 22nd, 1944. A cold wind pushed across the valley of Fort Douglas, Utah, carrying the sting of early winter. On the back of two olive-green military trucks sat a group of exhausted German women, their uniforms wrinkled, their faces marked with sleepless nights. Their boots still carried the mud of retreat, of fear, of a world that had collapsed behind them. Every one of them had been told the same thing. Capture is worse than death. Americans show no mercy. Women prisoners vanish. So when the trucks rolled to a stop and the gates clanged shut behind them, they braced for humiliation, cruelty, maybe even violence. Instead, the first thing they noticed was the smell. Warm bread. Fresh. Real. Not the stale gray loaves they had grown used to in the Reich, but soft bread being baked somewhere inside the camp kitchens. A female American nurse approached, carrying a pile of folded blankets. She handed one to a trembling German woman in the front row and said the strangest words imaginable. "You're safe here." The woman didn't answer. She simply stared. Safe? In the hands of the enemy? Nothing made sense. No shouting, no blows, no jeering guards with raised rifles. Just organized lines, quiet footsteps on gravel, and the distant rattling of pots and pans from a kitchen preparing a meal. For prisoners. This first moment struck Anna Vogel, formerly a battlefield nurse in Germany, like a blow to the chest. She had spent months living on fear, sleeping beside dying soldiers, believing American capture meant the end. But now, standing in the chilly courtyard, she felt something even more unsettling than fear. Confusion. Why were they being treated like human beings? Why were blankets offered instead of fists? Why did the guards speak calmly as though this were a routine assignment instead of war? Anna watched as one of her fellow prisoners broke into silent tears. Not from pain, but from the shock of kindness. That night, as they were shown to clean bunks inside wooden barracks, the confusion only deepened. The rooms had stoves, blankets, and orderly rows of beds. A guard explained the rules in slow English. Breakfast at dawn. Medical checks twice a week. Work duty optional but paid. No harassment tolerated. Paid? Protected? Fed? America, it seemed, was fighting a very different kind of war. One that didn't rely on bullets, but on dignity. And Anna, whose entire world had been shaped by propaganda, felt the first cracks breaking inside her. She couldn't sleep. She kept whispering to herself, "Why are they doing this? What does it mean?" But soon, she would learn that this was only the beginning, and that one small, unexpected act inside the infirmary would change her understanding of mercy, of war, and of America forever. Because what happened next, the injury, the nurse, and the simple object that followed her for 2 years, would shatter everything she thought she knew about enemies and about herself.
The long train journey west felt endless, a blur of rattling wheels and landscapes that seemed too wide for the world Anna used to know. Every few hours, the guards walked through the carriages, counting heads, checking tags, and quietly handing out water. Their silence unnerved her more than shouting ever could. She kept waiting for cruelty to begin, but nothing happened. No humiliation, no threats, only routine. Outside her window, America unfolded like a map she had never studied. Rolling fields, abandoned farmhouses, long stretches of desert where the earth glowed orange under the sun. The other captured nurses whispered the same fears again and again. "They will punish us. They must." But the train kept moving, steady and predictable, as if the war had been left somewhere behind them. On the second night, the guards distributed small sacks of food, bread, dried fruit, even a few squares of chocolate. One of the German women broke down crying. Not from fear, but from the shock that the enemy she had been taught to hate was feeding her like a human being. Anna didn't cry, but her hands trembled as she bit into the bread. It tasted soft, real, nothing like the stale rations of the collapsing Reich. When the train finally slowed again, mountains rose in the distance. Tall, white, impossibly calm. Utah, the final stop. A place she'd never heard of but would never forget. Fort Douglas did not look like a battlefield. It looked like a contradiction. Barbed wire, guard towers and fences, but also clean pathways, wooden barracks, and the faint smell of cooking drifting through the air. As the prisoners walked through the gates, Anna kept waiting for the moment everything would change, for cruelty to break the illusion. Instead, a clipboard was handed to her. Name? Age? Medical issues? The translator asked gently. No one laughed at her hesitation. No one barked orders. They simply wrote her answers down and moved her along to the next station. An inspection, a uniform marked PW, a folded blanket, a small bar of soap wrapped neatly in paper. The bunkhouse she was assigned to was warm. A nurse handing out supplies told her, "You follow rules here, we follow rules, and everyone gets through the winter alive." Alive. She hadn't heard that word spoken with certainty in a long time. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Anna stood outside the barracks and watched an American guard talking with a German prisoner, calm, even friendly. She didn't understand how enemies could speak without hatred. It made no sense. Nothing made sense anymore. That night, lying on her bunk, she wrote one sentence in her notebook. If this is the enemy, then what was the world I came from? But her confusion was only beginning, because the next day something even stranger happened. Something that would challenge everything she believed about war, mercy, and survival. Because the moment Anna stepped into the camp infirmary, the real shock of American kindness began. By autumn, the Utah air turned dry and golden. Dust swirled in little spirals near the fence lines, and the mountains looked sharper, as if carved by the wind. Inside the camp, life took on a steady rhythm. To the outside world, these prisoners were the enemy. But inside the wire, they were farmers, cooks, cleaners, and students trying to rebuild pieces of themselves. News from Europe arrived slowly, often weeks late, carried in thin envelopes stamped with censor marks. One afternoon in late September, a mail truck rattled through the gates. Prisoners gathered around the distribution table, the air humming with nervous hope. Some received letters filled with stories of ruined towns, food shortages, missing relatives. Others received nothing at all. Silence was the cruelest answer. Anna finally received her first letter in months. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The ink was faded, the paper soft from being handled too many times. It was from her mother. Your brother has been missing since August. The city is in ruins. We pray every day. If you are alive, write back. Her chest tightened, and for a moment the barracks seemed to spin. She read the letter again and again until the words blurred. When she finally looked up, Clara was watching her from across the room. Bad news? Clara asked gently. Anna nodded but couldn't speak. Clara didn't push. She simply placed a small packet of sugar on the table and said, "For your tea tonight." That tiny gesture of comfort, simple, quiet, human, was more than any words could have been. It reminded Anna that kindness sometimes arrived in the smallest possible form. Over the next weeks, the emotional strain began to grow inside the camp. As Germany weakened, the prisoners felt the weight of uncertainty. Some became restless. Others grew more cooperative, hoping for early release. A few refused to believe anything they heard, insisting the Reich would rise again. One evening, after a long day in the laundry, Anna sat outside near the fence staring at the sunset. The sky glowed orange and purple behind the guard towers. She didn't hear Miller approach until he stopped beside her. "You okay?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I received news. My brother is missing." Miller lowered his eyes, then said quietly, I'm sorry." The sincerity in his voice cut deeper than any cruelty ever could. She was his enemy, yet he spoke as if they were simply two human beings standing under the same sky. "You know," he added after a moment, "a lot of families here are missing someone too." That thought had never occurred to her. She had imagined the Americans as untouched by loss, untouched by ruins. But they were human too. Sons, brothers, fathers, fighting and hoping just like the people on her side of the world. That night she wrote in her notebook, "My world has been broken by war, but here I am, learning that suffering is not a nation. It is human." The camp slept in silence, but Anna stayed awake, staring at the moon through the window. For the first time, she wondered if she would ever see home again, and if the home she returned to would even still exist. The end of the war was coming, and with it, the hardest lessons she had yet to face. By autumn, the Utah air turned dry and golden. Dust swirled across the campyard every afternoon, coating the barracks windows in a thin layer of brown. The season brought new routines and new emotions, some heavier than any chain. America was no longer the terrifying monster she had been taught to expect. But that didn't mean the war had stopped following Anna. It shadowed her in letters, rumors, and every memory that refused to die quietly. One cool evening, a Red Cross truck arrived at the front gate, carrying sacks of mail. The guards called out names, one by one, and prisoners rushed forward like starving birds. Letters had become the most dangerous things in the camp. They brought hope, grief, and guilt, all in a single envelope. When Anna heard her name, she froze. For months she had feared opening a letter from home. But she stepped forward, took the thin envelope, and returned to her bunk. Her hands trembled as she sat on her cushion, the one that had traveled with her since capture. The letter was from her mother. "Anna, the house is gone. Cologne burns every night. My brother is missing. Maybe hiding. Maybe dead. We pray that God keeps you safe, though even praying feels strange now." Anna's chest tightened until she could barely breathe. The camp suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in like fists. She had been healed, fed, sheltered, but her family, her world, was collapsing. That night she walked outside, past the barracks, toward the fence. The mountains glowed orange with the last of the daylight. She pressed both hands against the cold wire. Why me? Why safety for her? And ruins for them? Behind her, someone spoke softly. It was Miller, the quiet guard who sometimes lingered near the barracks during evening songs. "Bad news?" he asked gently. She couldn't answer, but he saw the truth in her trembling shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said. "War hurts everyone, even the ones far from it." She wanted to hate him. She wanted to blame him, but the hatred wouldn't come. Only exhaustion. Only longing for something she couldn't name. The next morning, rumors began to ripple through the camp. Whispers of bombed cities. Whispers of German retreat. Whispers of horrors uncovered in the east. Things none of them wanted to believe. One woman screamed when she heard the news. Another fainted. Some prisoners argued, shouting that the Americans were lying. But Anna remained silent. Her mother's letter had already told her enough. Everything she believed about right, wrong, victory, and loyalty was fracturing. And inside those cracks, something painful but honest was beginning to grow. The camp chaplain visited the women's barracks later that week. He offered small wooden crosses, simple ones carved by prisoners in the men's section. Anna took one and held it in her palm, feeling the rough edges. It reminded her of the one that had hung above her childhood bed, the one probably buried under stones now. She realized something then, something frightening. She had come to America as an enemy, but America was no longer a place she feared. It had quietly become the place where she had learned mercy, dignity, and truth. And truth was heavier than chains. As winter crept closer, the camp prepared for the cold. Extra blankets were issued. The stoves inside the barracks burned longer each night. Anna helped distribute winter clothing to other prisoners. Mittens, wool caps, coats with PW painted in white across the back. Some women cried when they put them on, not because the coats were warm, but because they came from the people they had been taught to hate. Kindness was a weapon they had never expected. One evening, while Anna folded laundry in the infirmary, Ellen, the nurse who had first tended to her, sat beside her. "You look tired," Ellen said softly. "I am," Anna whispered. "Not from work, from thinking." Ellen nodded as if she understood. "The war will end soon, and when it does, you'll have choices to make." Anna swallowed hard. She knew that. She knew that going home would mean facing ruins, facing judgment, facing the truth of what her country had done. She also knew that staying in America was impossible. But one question tortured her every night. When freedom finally came, would she even know how to carry it? That question stayed in her mind like a thorn. And soon, a single piece of news, a message delivered on a cold morning by a trembling translator, would change everything the camp thought it knew about the war, about justice, and about themselves. And what happened next would push Anna into the hardest choice she had ever faced. Stay with me, because the next moment in her story was the one that broke the camp's silence forever. Because just when Anna thought she understood America, one unexpected announcement would shatter everything she believed. Again, autumn settled over Fort Douglas with a strange kind of stillness. The mountains turned gold, the nights colder, and the wind carried the smell of pine and distant snow. For most prisoners, the change of season meant routine, safety, and the slow passage of days. For Anna, it meant something else. Waiting. A rumor had spread across the women's barracks like wildfire. Letters from Germany were finally arriving. For months she had imagined home in flashes. Her mother's garden, her brother's laughter, the chalky smell of the hospital where she once worked. But as she stood in line outside the administration hut, waiting for her name to be called, a new fear twisted in her chest. What if no one was left to write? A guard stepped out with a small bundle of envelopes. "Vogel, Anna," he called. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward. He handed her a thin envelope, edges worn, the paper soft from the journey across an ocean at war. The handwriting was shakier than she remembered, but unmistakable. Her mother. Inside, only 3 paragraphs waited, written in faded ink. The first line struck her like a blow. "Your brother is missing." Her breath hitched. The world around her blurred. She had imagined him cold or hungry, but never gone. Her knees weakened as she read the next lines. He had been fighting near Aachen, the same place she herself had been captured. The house had been bombed twice. Food was scarce. Neighbors had disappeared. Her mother said she prayed every night that Anna was alive, but dared not hope too much. Then came the line that cut deepest. "Some say you are being mistreated in America. I fear what they may be doing to you." Anna closed her eyes. If only her mother knew. If only she could see the blankets, the canteen, the doctors, the orderly routines. If only she could taste the warm bread, the soup, the fruit she never expected. If only she could understand how confusing kindness from the enemy felt. She folded the letter to her chest and sank onto the bench outside the hut. Tears burned her eyes. Tears not just of grief, but of guilt. Why was she safe when her family wasn't? Why did she have a bed while her mother slept in a cellar? Why did she eat oatmeal each morning while children in Germany starved? The weight of it pressed on her until she felt she couldn't breathe. A shadow fell across her. It was Miller, the quiet guard with gentle eyes. He didn't ask. He didn't prod. He just sat beside her. After a long silence, he said softly, "Bad news?" She nodded, unable to speak. He hesitated, then offered her something small, something she never expected. A folded piece of paper. "It's a form," he said awkwardly. "If you want to send a letter home, I can help you write it if the English is hard." She stared at him, overwhelmed. A guard helping her write to her mother? How was she supposed to understand this world? How was she supposed to explain that the people she'd been taught to fear were treating her with more dignity than her own leaders ever had? That night, she sat under the dim barrack light and wrote her reply slowly, carefully. Not the truth, not all of it, but enough. "I am safe. Do not worry for me. Pray instead for peace." She signed it with a shaking hand. When she sealed the envelope, she felt something inside her shift again. For the first time, the enemy had given her not just comfort, but hope. And that hope terrified her. But Anna's confusion was about to deepen even further, because the next morning, something happened inside the camp that shattered everything she thought she understood about mercy, justice, and loyalty. And it began with a single German prisoner who refused to follow the rules.